The year is 1876. The U.S. government dispatches its celebrated hero, George Custer, to Montana to break the resistance led by Sitting Bull. However, as the general ascends a ridge, the scale of the encampment below is far greater than his intelligence suggested. Custer does not hesitate. Grinning, he lifts his hat and shouts, "Hurrah, boys! We've got them." Unbeknownst to him, he is leading his troops directly into one of the biggest gatherings of Native American warriors in history, and no backup is on the way to rescue him. A single hour later, his entire command has been wiped out. Custer's legacy is forever defined not by triumph, but by one of the most stunning defeats in the annals of the U.S. military. So what led to this disastrous outcome? This is the incredible account of Custer's final battle. George Custer came from humble beginnings as a farmer's son in Ohio. He possessed a singular drive for recognition. He deeply desired fame and a permanent spot in history. In his youth, he was clever, fearless, and supremely confident. He enrolled at West Point in 1857, accumulating a record 726 demerits for misconduct, more than any previous cadet. Yet his teachers and peers could not ignore that the rebellious young man had the raw qualities of a gifted military leader. The outbreak of the Civil War provided Custer the perfect opportunity to demonstrate this. Custer was a gifted commander, achieving numerous wins during the conflict and consistently guiding his troops from the front lines. He became known for plunging into situations no other officer would risk. He never commanded his soldiers to undertake something he wouldn't do himself. His men revered him, and his commanding officers held him in such high regard that he was promoted to general at the age of 23, among the youngest in the nation's history. Newspapers called him the Boy General. Soon the public was fascinated by the daring General Custer, with his showy personality and famous long blonde hair. On July 3, 1863, Custer and his unit were crucial in maintaining the Union position at Gettysburg. Leading from the front in full uniform, Custer attacked Confederate forces at a pivotal juncture, helping to turn the battle's momentum to the Union's advantage. His distinguished service persisted right up to the war's final day. The table on which Robert E. Lee signed his surrender, later given to Custer's wife, included an inscription stating that no individual had contributed more to achieving this surrender than your spouse. After the war concluded, Custer was given command of the 7th Cavalry to manage issues with the Plains Indians. He despised this post, feeling it offered no potential for honor. It was not until 1868 that he saw another opening to grasp the glory he craved. In its constant push to expand westward, the United States had targeted the Black Hills. The Sioux, for whom this land was home, had no intention of surrendering it. In April 1868, the Sioux Nation and the U.S. government agreed to the Fort Laramie Treaty. It granted the Sioux exclusive ownership of the Black Hills, provided they ceased assaults on settlers and remained within a designated reservation. But the U.S. government had no plan to uphold this agreement. The Black Hills were too rich in resources, and officials anticipated that a flood of new settlers would quickly anger the Sioux into breaking the treaty. Uninformed of this bad faith, most Sioux leaders accepted the terms. One who did not was Chief Sitting Bull. He was Lakota, one of the two major Sioux groups, and he rejected the treaty entirely. Sitting Bull was convinced that American expansion onto their lands was certain, and that fighting was the sole method to protect their culture. Sitting Bull was Custer's opposite in temperament. Where Custer was impulsive and daring, Sitting Bull was deliberate and strategic. His name was derived from his considered, patient nature. But he was not solely a military chief. He was also a holy man. He said he had received visions from the Great Spirit, which directed him to overcome the American forces. He united many Lakota to his movement, along with individuals from neighboring Cheyenne bands in various smaller tribes. Sitting Bull brought together a powerful alliance of nomadic fighters to resist American expansion, collaborating closely with his trusted ally, another Lakota named Gaul. They initiated attacks on American outposts and on opposing Native American nations such as the Crow and the Arikara. In the months after Fort Laramie, Sitting Bull's alliance started assaulting U.S. settlements. The United States required a courageous and skilled leader to counteract Sitting Bull. They required George Custer. Custer was dispatched with the 7th Cavalry in October 1868. Winter was approaching, the season when they were at their most exposed. Raveling along the Washita River in Oklahoma, Custer discovered a Cheyenne village on November 26th. At first light on the 27th, he commanded a charge through the settlement, killing anyone they encountered. Some were Cheyenne fighters, but the majority were non-combatants, women and children. His executive officer, Major Joel Elliott, took 20 soldiers to chase the escaping Cheyenne, while Custer completed operations in the camp. 103 Cheyenne were dead, and Custer viewed it as a magnificent victory. However, Custer's personal hunger for fame had again created problems. First, the community he attacked was led by a Cheyenne chief who was amicable toward the U.S., making any future peace with the Cheyenne virtually unattainable. Second, it was just one of many villages along the river, and news traveled fast to the other Cheyenne settlements, compelling Custer to retreat immediately. This resulted in a third issue. Major Joel Elliott had not returned. With the other Cheyenne villages now arming for battle, Custer chose not to search for him. Major Elliott and all his men were discovered dead weeks later. Many in the 7th Cavalry held Custer responsible for their demise. Captain Frederick Benteen was his most vocal detractor. He penned a letter holding Custer accountable for Elliott's death. The letter was published in the press, enraging Custer. Although Benteen remained under his command, neither man ever reconciled. Custer's success at Washita restored his public image. Now celebrated as a hero of the western frontier, Custer spent the subsequent years leading the 7th Cavalry in campaigns against the tribes. In 1873, he was stationed permanently at Fort Abraham Lincoln in Dakota to better address the threat from Sitting Bull and his opposition to American authority. Two key figures entered his life at this time. First, Major Marcus Reno was assigned to Custer's command as a senior officer. Reno was a short-tempered man with a significant drinking problem, and similar to Captain Benteen, he considered Custer to be unbearably proud and egotistical. Luckily for Custer, he could depend on other loyal personnel to balance critics like Benteen and Reno. His brothers, Tom and Boston, came to serve with him, as did his brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Calhoun, and his wife also moved to Fort Abraham Lincoln. Custer's supporters were not only white Americans, however. In 1873, a scout of mixed Sioux and Arikara heritage named Bloody Knife was attached to Custer's regiment, and the two formed a strong friendship. Not every Native American supported Sitting Bull. Bloody Knife held a specific grudge against him. He had been acquainted with Sitting Bull previously, but had always been poorly treated by him. He particularly despised Gaul, Sitting Bull's principal lieutenant, who had tormented Bloody Knife when they were young. A childhood rivalry had escalated into a blood feud. Bloody Knife nearly killed Gaul in a confrontation, while Gaul later killed Bloody Knife's brothers and son in different attacks. Custer was the obvious candidate to head an 1874 mission into the Black Hills. Officially, the goal was to locate a position for a new fort to contain Sitting Bull. In truth, its primary objective was to locate gold and function as a large publicity effort to encourage a surge of miners and settlers to invade the area. The mission resembled a guided tour more than a military operation. They faced no major opposition, and Custer expended more ammunition hunting alongside his brothers and Bloody Knife than in combat. Photographers and journalists accompanying the trip published accounts and pictures of Custer's thrilling western journey and the fruitful identification of gold. Custer's mission started a gold rush. By the end of 1875, 15,000 white settlers had poured into the territory. Officially, because they were private citizens, the U.S. government was not responsible, and thus the Fort Laramie Treaty was not broken. Unofficially, President Ulysses S. Grant endorsed them entirely, and was simply anticipating for Sitting Bull and the Lakota to react with force, giving him a pretext to take the Black Hills completely. Washington offered one final proposal to the Sioux to sell the Black Hills in September 1875. Sitting Bull's predictions that the Americans would always covet the land were confirmed. The Sioux refused the offer, so the president issued an ultimatum. Any Lakota or Cheyenne individuals who declined to relocate to U.S. reservations by January 1876 would be deemed enemies. It was a completely unreasonable command. The deadline was issued in November 1875, when winter conditions were already severe. Even if people desired to comply, they would perish from exposure attempting the journey. It was a clear injustice. The campaign to hunt down Sitting Bull and his hostile followers left Fort Abraham Lincoln on May 17, 1876. Overall command of the operation belonged to General Alfred Terry, an ally of Custer. Scout intelligence indicated that Sitting Bull had assembled his people along the Yellowstone River, specifically where four smaller rivers met it: the Powder, the Tongue, the Rosebud, and the Bighorn. Terry and Custer would lead the main force west along the Yellowstone from Dakota. A second column under General John Gibbon would advance from Montana in the west, while a third, under General George Crook, would move north from Wyoming. The aim was to block all escape routes and corner the Indians between the columns like cattle. Custer approached it like a pleasant outing. Even Terry became frustrated with Custer's repeated detours to hunt or explore with his brothers. Major Reno and Captain Benteen were equally exasperated. Reno was thankful when Terry assigned him to a scouting mission along the Rosebud River for several days, where he successfully located Sitting Bull's trail. Reno hurried back with the news, but Custer labeled him a coward for not engaging. With the trail now hot, there was no time for a dispute. Terry chose to divide the forces once more. He would combine with Gibbon's troops from Montana and then proceed down the Bighorn River from the north. Custer would instead move south and follow that trail across the Rosebud. They now had a solid notion of Sitting Bull's location. If Custer found Sitting Bull, he was to move to the south and hold for Terry and Gibbon to arrive from the north. Naturally, given Custer's history, expecting him to wait was like expecting a hungry dog to ignore a steak. Everyone predicted Custer would chase glory the instant it appeared. "Custer, don't be greedy, leave some for us," were the final words said to him before his departure. "No," he responded, "I will not." The Americans were correct. Sitting Bull and his people were precisely where they anticipated. Following President Grant's ultimatum that year, Sitting Bull had assembled thousands more fighters. They knew the Americans were coming, and a large force was their only hope of survival. If they were defeated, this could be their final season as free people on the plains. Sitting Bull's call gathered approximately 8,000 people to his cause. Gall remained his chief lieutenant, but he also attracted other capable leaders. Among these, Crazy Horse was exceptional. A member of a different Lakota band, Crazy Horse was youthful, dynamic, and completely brave. Like Sitting Bull, he said he had received visions granting him special power, which was the origin of his name. It was Crazy Horse who first engaged the American soldiers advancing that summer. On June 17th, General Crook's column from Wyoming was encamped along the Rosebud River when Crazy Horse's scouts spotted them. With 1,500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors behind him, Crazy Horse did the unexpected and charged an American army of similar size. Traditionally, native fighters required a significant numerical advantage to win a direct battle. Crazy Horse defied this convention. He instructed his men to harass the Americans from all sides, denying them any respite. One rider attacked from the left and another from the right, confusing the American soldiers' aim. Only the prompt action of Crook's Crow and Cheyenne scouts allowed Crook to withdraw after suffering 30 casualties. Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull had achieved a nearly unimaginable victory against the Americans in a pitched battle. Crook was stunned and quickly wrote to his superiors about the most impressive fighting by Indians he had ever witnessed. Crucially, he did not send a warning up to Custer or Terry. Now aware that U.S. troops were nearby, Sitting Bull directed his people to a new location. 8,000 Lakota and Cheyenne followed him to a place they named the Valley of the Greasy Grass. They established their lodges near the hills by the Little Bighorn River, which flows into the main Bighorn a few miles north. There they observed the traditional Sundance ceremony. It was said that during that Sundance, Sitting Bull experienced another vision. He saw hundreds of American soldiers falling into the Indian camp. Sitting Bull interpreted this as an omen of a great victory to come. Meanwhile, Custer's force had followed Sitting Bull's trail over the Rosebud and up the hills toward the Bighorn River. They were unaware of Crook's defeat days before. Bloody Knife and the other scouts noted that the trail indicated far more Indians than Custer anticipated, possibly thousands. Bloody Knife cautioned Custer that there might be too many to fight alone, and they should wait for Terry and Gibbon before attacking. Just after sunrise on June 25th, Custer's scouts climbed the hills a few miles east of the Little Bighorn and saw the smoke from Sitting Bull's camp. Custer had no doubt. Today was the day for glory. Custer commanded 700 men divided into 12 companies. One company remained to guard the supplies, but the rest would see combat. Custer would take 5 companies across the river to assault the camp from the north. Major Reno took 3 to attack from the south, with Bloody Knife scouting the path. Captain Benteen would take the last 3 and sweep further south behind Reno before advancing to join the fight on the camp's western side. Custer could not have been pleased to depend on 2 men he disliked, but all the men he trusted, like his brothers Tom and Boston and his brother-in-law Lieutenant Calhoun, were with him. Custer moved north, using the hills for concealment until the final moment. Finally, around 3:30 p.m., he reached the top of the last ridge overlooking the camp and saw thousands of lodges spread over 3 miles. There were far more than he anticipated. He hastily wrote down orders. Benteen, come on. Big village. Be quick. Bring packs, and sent a courier to deliver it to the captain. Never one to delay, however, Custer decided to attack immediately. The boy general waved his hat and yelled, "Hurrah, boys! We've got them!" Then he led the charge down the slope. To the south, Major Reno's force had crossed the river and was nearing the camp with 150 men. Bloody Knife and the scouts were the first to meet Lakota and Cheyenne warriors on the camp's periphery. This was the initial alert to Sitting Bull's people that they were under assault. Following custom, Sitting Bull and Gall were located in the southern part of the camp and were the first hit by Reno's soldiers. As soon as Reno met initial resistance, he ordered his men to dismount and form a skirmish line. Bullets flew into the camp, hitting warriors, women, and children. Sitting Bull's first priority was to protect his people. He ordered his nephew and another warrior to rush south and attempt to parley with the attackers. Both were shot down. Sitting Bull got on his horse, only for an American bullet to kill the animal beneath him. That was the final insult. "They have shot my favorite horse. It is like they have shot me. Attack them!" Gall and Crazy Horse led the counterattack in the south. Reno was entirely unprepared for any organized defense, and the Indians halted Reno's advance. Survivors indicated that Reno had been drinking all day, impairing his decisions. Reno and Bloody Knife tried to plan their next action. The Lakota community was tight-knit, and some fighters likely recognized Bloody Knife beside Reno. He was a clear target. Reno was mid-sentence when a bullet hit Bloody Knife in the head. He died immediately. His blood and brain matter splattered across the intoxicated Major's face. Bloody Knife's death broke Reno's nerve, and he called for a retreat. "Any of you wish to make your escape? Follow me." Discipline vanished as Reno's men fled back across the river. Soldiers discarded their weapons and horses as they floundered through the water and up the sharp bluffs. The Indians simply stood on the far bank and shot them. On the hills to the southeast, Benteen had heard the noise and returned to look. As he waited on the hilltop, Reno scrambled up the slope with a few survivors. "For God's sake, Benteen, hold your command and help me. I've lost half my men." Benteen frowned and had one question. "Where is Custer?" Reno had no reply. Benteen could only shake his head. He had seen this before. "It's another Major Elliott affair," he sighed, recalling the Washita incident years prior. Custer had abandoned them again to pursue glory, or so Benteen later asserted. The fact that Benteen, Reno, and his men could hear intense gunfire from Custer's direction suggests a different reality. Benteen received the written order from Custer to come and help him, but he disregarded it. Instead, Benteen and Reno remained on the hill for the next 2 hours until the gunfire ceased, and one of Benteen's angry captains went to investigate personally. What he found was horrifying. We do not know the precise details of what happened to Custer after he charged down the ridge. The following is the most reliable reconstruction of Custer's last stand. Custer gathered his men on a rise, later called Calhoun Hill, to assess the situation and wait for Benteen. Custer had a practice of taking Indian captives to compel surrender. He likely intended to repeat this strategy. His troops would cross the Little Bighorn into the camp, seize women and children, and force Sitting Bull to yield to save them. It was a simple matter of charging down the hill and crossing the river. Custer would have led from the front. The sight of Custer and his men would have been frightening. Even Sitting Bull, when he first learned of Custer's attack from the north, was apprehensive. "We thought we were whipped," he said. But Cheyenne and Lakota warriors were hidden on the far bank and opened fire on the Americans. By now, Crazy Horse and the rest of the camp's warriors had stopped chasing Reno and were rushing to confront Custer. Custer had misjudged their numbers. The Americans started to fall back up the hill. Lieutenant Calhoun and his company fortified a hilltop that now carries his name. Custer, his brother, and most of the others retreated to what is now known as Last Stand Hill. Based on the placement of the bodies, half of Calhoun's unit never reached his position. Within minutes, Crazy Horse had led a group of mounted warriors to surround them from the rear as the main body of Indians advanced up the slopes. Calhoun's men were overrun, and every single soldier was killed. By the time his brother-in-law's position was overwhelmed, Custer must have known that Benteen was not coming with the requested reinforcements. Thousands of Indians swarmed over the hills, engulfing the remnants of his command. The last of Custer's men were killed around him, slain by a hail of arrows and bullets. It was so chaotic that some of the Indians accidentally shot each other. No one knows who was the final soldier standing, but Sitting Bull later shared what his warriors told him. They said that up there, where the last fight happened, where the final resistance was made, the long hair stood like a sheaf of corn, with all the ears fallen around him. Custer may have been the last to fall. Soon after the gunfire from Custer's position stopped, Benteen and Reno found themselves surrounded at their location, now called Reno Hill. Their 400 men dug in and held off the Indians through the night of the 25th. Only at sunset on the 26th, when scouts saw Terry and Gibbon arriving from the north, did Sitting Bull order his people to withdraw. General Terry arrived soon after. His first question was the same one Benteen had asked Reno. "Where's Custer?" The bodies of 200 men from 5 companies of the 7th Cavalry were found where they had fallen the previous day. Some had been scalped and mutilated by the Indians. It was Benteen who, walking among the dead, was called over by a private to examine one specific body. 2 gunshot wounds, one in the chest and one in the head. "My God, it's him!" On July 6, 1876, news reached the 7th Cavalry's headquarters at Fort Abraham Lincoln of Custer's catastrophic loss. Within days, the entire nation knew of the disaster at Little Bighorn. Days earlier, on July 4, 1876, America had celebrated its centennial. It was a time of optimism and hope, of honoring past progress and future potential. It was a moment to celebrate American heroes like Custer, who was out battling those savage, primitive Indians at that very moment. Custer's death should have been unthinkable. Americans viewed themselves as invincible, unstoppable agents of civilization. When news arrived that Indians had killed a hero like Custer and 268 men in open combat, most Americans could not comprehend it. Some blamed Custer's arrogance. He was always charging into peril for his own glory, and it finally cost him everything. Many blamed Benteen and Reno, who had ignored Custer's orders and sat idle while his men were massacred. Surprisingly, few attributed the outcome to Sitting Bull and his warriors, who had proven themselves as remarkable combatants on 2 occasions. America had sent its finest against them and been defeated. Sitting Bull was prepared for whatever they sent next, and that's the full, unvarnished truth. If you appreciated this deep dive, you have to subscribe to Rootvolutionary. We're just getting started. Thanks for watching.